It's June 13th, 2006, and I'm going to talk about intrinsics this morning. And intrinsics is a term that I picked up from fractal theory, which talked about the characteristics you see as you work your way down a zooming fractal. So you see a picture of a what's called a Mandelbrot set. You zoom into a picture, and you zoom and you zoom, and you see the same thing reappearing as you go deeper and deeper. That thing that you're seeing can be called the intrinsic. So it's something that manifests itself at many different scales. So you could call it a scale-independent property. So if you define an intrinsic as a scale-independent property, then you can talk about things that affect a system at many different scales rather than just one. Now, when we talk about things, we don't normally talk about things that happen across scale. We kind of pick one scale and use that as our characteristic scale, the standard point that we look at things. So, for example, you can look at health at the genetic level, at the cellular level, at the organ, at the system, at the body, the human mind, body, spirit, family, communities, and species. So there's many different levels that you can talk about health. And each level has its own characteristic scale. So if you had a microscope that you're looking at thing, or a telescope, and you have a zoom setting, so you turn this zoom setting to higher or lower scale, and you zoom in or out, you can have this thing looking at different scales up and down this continuum. So if you look at the world through a continuum of scale, and this whole stack, if you will, we find that sciences and our way of looking at it tends to slice the scale in one specific area. So physics looks at the atomic level and maybe up to molecules, but then chemistry takes over, and the chemistry does molecules, and then biology takes over and does the next level, the cellular level, if you will, and then the social biology or sociology comes up at even a higher level. So we have different sciences that are attached to different characteristic scales on this continuum, and in part that's caused by the need to use the logic of causality. So by causality we mean you poke the system this way and something happens on the other side. And what that does is gives you a very good scheme for dealing with things that work within certain scales. And you know, this is what's given us science. So physicists have been able to do experiments and prove things within the realm of causality. However, things that happen across scale, that go up and down this stack, that work at the species level, at the human level, at the organ level, at the cellular level, at the genetic level, those things aren't as easily dealt with in this causal manner. And things that could have a huge effect in this scale-free model of something that goes up and down this stack could be kind of almost invisible at the causal level at each individual slice of the continuum. And this is what I'm trying to get through with the notion of intrinsics. So this intrinsic properties of a system, or space if you will, the intrinsic properties are those that are scale independent, that do go up and down. So what are the intrinsics of a given activity that relate to this set of effects? Once you start talking about scale-free intrinsics, you have to think differently about causality. And this is a huge shift in our thinking, and it's what I call cascades instead of cause. So a cascade is something that happens at many different levels, scale levels, at the same time. So a cascade can have huge effects based on things that happen at different levels of the scale, characteristic scales. So for example, the HIV/AIDS epidemic could be considered to be a cascade of effects from the genetic level, from the immune system level, from the personal behavior level, from the global transportation level, and the species as a whole. So there's many different levels that we could look at AIDS. So nature doesn't divide itself into characteristic scales to prove causality. It just does its thing and has its cascading effects. So cascades aren't subject to the same laws and sense of objectivity that we have in our cascading, in our causal model. So in the causal model, we have this billiard table, and you poke the cue ball with a stick, and it goes across, and F equals ma, and the angles all work out. Somebody is actually observing the billiard table and is the objective observer, and somebody else is the subject that's being acted upon. So we separated the subject and the object, if you will. So the objectivity of science allows us to say, okay, it doesn't really matter what color the balls are. A red ball and a green ball and a purple ball are all going to bounce around according to F equals ma. So color of the ball is not an issue. That's fine if that's what you're talking about. And we've done some wonderful things with that level of causality. We've gotten ourselves to the moon, and communications networks and satellites and computers. Tremendous technological advances by understanding things at that scale, at single scale causality. However, my theory here is that we are not able to talk about these cascading effects, the things that happen at multiple scales simultaneously, through simply looking at the causal slices. So by slicing a continuum into physics, chemistry, and biology, and then saying, well, what are the causes in physics, and how do they relate to the causes in chemistry, and how do they relate to the causes in biology, is not going to be very productive. I think when we have to have a model for understanding cascades of things that happen across many different scales. So in moving towards that theory, I'm looking at the notion of intrinsics being the triggers for cascades. So something that happens in many different scales, working down here, causes this cascading of effects, and the cascade then can happen at many different levels. It can happen at a global level, at a local level, at a smaller level, at a regional, atomic level, I don't know. But the mathematics of understanding how that works, as far as I found, has not been very well developed, if at all. And I'm not that smart in my mathematics. I have looked a little bit. Kolmogorov's talked about spectral multifactorial. I'm not quite sure. Kolmogorov, he's studied compression theory and been used a lot of in information theory, but he also studied the atomic bomb explosion mathematics and how bombs go off, and the notion of a small, relatively small injection of energy into the bomb, triggering off a cascade of effects at many different scales. So the bomb generates energy at many different frequencies based on a single frequency that's or energy level that's put into it. Now it's kind of strange to be talking about better world and atomic bombs at the same time, but I think what's interesting here is that it is a cascade, it is a chain reaction, it is this, this energy infects other energy, and the energy takes off in other directions. So this is a very, very powerful metaphor to play with, and this notion of cascading effects is of great interest. I'll be talking about that in future sessions here. So what do we know about intrinsics as they now stand, and how would we find intrinsics? Well, first of all, we know that we can see intrinsics working with fractals, and I'll insert a fractal demonstration here in the video if I figure out how to do that. So that's one thing. We've seen intrinsics that way, and the sense of zooming in and out of a system, the powers of 10. That's also there's a book on that, and you can see a website. I'll refer to that website. I'm calling this a zoom stick. That think of a measuring stick, yardstick or a meter stick if you're European, not non whatever normal thing. Okay, think of a yardstick, and you have a dial on it, and what you do is if the dial setting is at 0 normally, and that becomes a normal yardstick. And you click the dial to 1, and it goes up a power of 10. So the world around you shrinks by 1/10, and 2 shrinks to 100, and 3, 1,000, and 4. Okay, so if you have this yardstick now, the yardstick stays the same. It looks like 1 yard in front of you, 1 meter, but the world around you shrinks or grows. So +3 is the world is what it looks like to, say, a cloud. -3 is what the world looks like to an ant. So everything that we see at level 0. Level 0 is the level that I'm talking to you at right now. But an ant would look at my computer here, and it would look like a mountain to climb, just to get over the edges, because he's working at the -3 level on his zoom stick. So this is an interesting metaphor for looking at the world, and also for looking at intrinsics. So if we allow ourselves to look at the world at different scales, we find a whole different world to look at those scales here. So roughly, if you turn the yardstick to +20, you're looking at the cosmos as a whole. So that's about as big as the cosmos is. If you turn it to -20, you're looking at it as small as we can get, the subatomic level. So this comes from Martin Rees' Just 6 Numbers. It's a book on astronomy. Well, what's interesting about this is that in this zoom stick, our level 0 is that we see our normal scale that we interact with and do our daily activities, eat food and participate in the universe or whatever. This scale is halfway between the largest and the smallest that we've observed, which is kind of interesting. So the understanding the universe as a whole, and we've taken pictures of how the galaxies are distributed and have a 3-dimensional model of the universe, is that's the biggest, but +20 from our current zoom stick, and -20 is as small as we've gotten in our subatomic visualization and understanding. Sitting right in the middle of this continuum, which is really a fascinating idea that we're just kind of halfway through here. Okay, what this does though is it gives us a model for looking at the world at different scales and how things affect us across scale. That's one thing. The other thing that's very interesting that Martin Rees pointed out is that the scale loops back on itself, and so our understanding of the cosmos as a whole, and for example, the distribution of galaxies around the universe, loops back to our understanding of quantum physics and the fluctuations at the time of the Big Bang. So that there's this, it's actually a loop. It's not just a single line across from small to big, but the big turns around and feeds back into the small. So he calls this the Ouroboros, the tail eating its snake, the snake eating its own tail, the dragon eating its tail in mythology. So this Ouroboros loop, if you want to call it that, turns out to be a circle rather than a line, which is pretty profound shift in thinking. So now what do we do here? Now we've got our scale that is, as we get bigger and bigger, it loops back to get smaller and smaller. We find this in our healthcare setting as we look to larger and larger scales of healthcare, from the genetic to the person to the species. Turns out the species loops back to the gene and the DNA and what's going on with our individual genes. So our evolution and the evolutionary control of the species feeds into this circle. So we have this circle of scale, if you will, that is different than our normal level of causality. And this is something that we haven't fully captured in our mathematics and our day-to-day thinking, shall we say. And I think it's very important. And I think what's happening here is that there's a new way of looking at this circle along scales through intrinsics, where you're actually taking a slice around the circle. So that we're looking at the circle in the intrinsics that feed themselves. And it changes our whole model of how things happen. And so that's a very interesting issue for me. Okay, so intrinsics are these things that you could say is kind of flowing around the circle. The scale-free properties that relate to many different scales simultaneously. So that brings up the question: is what are intrinsics, and show me one. So in my wanderings, in looking at healthcare in particular, what are the intrinsics of health? What are the things that manifest themselves at different levels that affect our health state of health? So identity strikes me as one of them. And we can talk about the identity of a gene, of a cell, of an organ, of an immune system, of a person, of a family, of a community, of a species. And this identity is this sense of what is the self and what is the not self. So the immune system has to understand when it's being looking at things to see whether to defend against it or not. Is this me, or is this some external pathogen that needs to be gotten rid of? So that identity at our immune system level is pretty well defined. There's lots of things about cancer that a cell goes crazy in its replication and everything. It loses its identity as a cell and becomes a little hyperactive or whatever. We can talk about the identity of a child, of a person in society. That psychologists talk about that a lot in their sense of self. They talk about the identity of a nation, of a culture, and they talk about identity of our species, Homo sapiens. Who are we, and where are we going as a species? And so this identity is something that happens at many different scale levels. And understanding just what is of the self and what is not is a very important part of the healthcare field, particularly. Okay, so identity is one of these intrinsics of health, I think. And now we can talk about other ways of looking at health process. Loss of identity. What if somebody loses their job and that has been their identity? I'm the under-assistant West Coast promotion man or something like that, and you lose your job and you're no longer that person. If you've identified yourself as your job title, the card that you carry around in your wallet, and you lose that, does that have an effect on other parts of your health? So, and I've heard stories of this. I haven't seen, hardcore studies on it. That cancer occurs frequently within 18 to 24 months after some loss of identity trauma. So you lose a spouse, you lose your job, you lose something that you've been attached to or identified with, if you will, and you end up getting sick. Well, could it be that some systems in your body, your immune system or whatever, is somehow triggered by this intrinsic at a different level? Is there a cascading effect? Does the loss of a job, belonging to a society that you lose your identity as a member of a community or whatever, does that actually have a cascading effect in cancer or other diseases? I'm not picking on cancer. I'm just started out with that. Very interesting question. Well, in terms of our causal model of understanding of things, that might be very difficult to understand. It might be difficult to see this cascading effect from otherwise flimsy effects. We get this also in the Columbine shooting where the were the kids that did the shooting, was it caused by video games? Was it caused by violent movies? Was it caused by this or that? And if so, what percentage was it caused by? So was it 17% this movie, 19% that movie, and 27% this video game? Or was it not that at all? Was it some other just zeitgeist of people thinking that this is the way that kids interact now? Well, maybe causality is the wrong question. Maybe it's wrong to say, did this cause that? The right question might be to ask, what were the cascades of effects that happened? What were the things that happened in this cascading manner that kind of self-reinforced themselves to trigger this activity? So anyway, in my wanderings about healthcare, I keep coming up with violence as one of the intrinsics that, cells going after each other, the immune system attacking invaders, if you will, all kinds of autoimmune activities. Suicide, I think suicide is 4 times more prevalent than homicide in at least the United States. So this is a very real form of violence that people are committing against themselves. All kinds of, spouse abuse or child abuse, spouse abuse, things like that in the family, gang warfare, global warfare. So it seems to be that we have this intrinsic of violence that happens at many different scales in health. So asking this question, what are the intrinsics, I think is an interesting model for looking at what's going on. So the cascading effects are of an intrinsic are very important. At another level, I think if you look at society, how we work as humanity, scale is very important. Intrinsics are important. For example, trust, and how much you trust, or what level, the ambient level of trust is in a society or culture or community. Francis Fukuyama talks about that in his book called Trust. It's a very interesting thing. He has a quote about something on the order of the level of economic wealth is determined by the level of trust in society. Interesting quote. And the corollary of that is, what can we do to increase the level of trust in society? And how would that work? So that's what I call trust raising. And that's a whole other theme. You can Google it a bit. But I think it also explains some of this causal stuff. So there was a recent convention called the Copenhagen Consensus. They had the question is, if we had $50 billion to spend, what would be the most important way to spend it? What could we do to make the world a better place? So they took all these problems, and what are the 10 worst problems in the world, and what do we need to do to fix them all? And I call this a beauty contest for problems. The proponents of the problems get up in front of a panel of judges and parade their stuff and show off why their problem is the worst problem and it needs more money. Which, of course, there are problems in the world, and of course we need to prioritize our money and our funding. But if we take this causal slice level, that we slice the world into this one problem, make that the all-important definitive notion of what we're doing, are we really seeing the full cascading effects of what we're doing, in a sense? So is poverty really a whole lot different than access to water, which is different than literacy, which is different than women's empowerment and gender equality? And if they're not, how do we go after these fundamental intrinsic issues other than how they are manifested as problems? So we only think about women's equality in the context of AIDS or illiteracy or whatever. We don't see the intrinsics of the situation. We don't see the things that affect all of the problems. So trust, for example, might be one of those issues that the level of trust is falling and it's causing cascading effects, and the cascading effects are these 10 problems. So trust might be an intrinsic that affects all 10 of the problems on the podium, and but nobody sees it as something directly to be dealt with. So all they see are the individual pieces, and the want to fund the manifestations of loss of trust. When, if we fix the trust issue and generated more trust and build a more trusting environment, or allow people to find trustworthy relationships more easily, we could have a huge effect at many different levels in this cascading effect. So, looking at this proposal from the objectivity level, the causal level, no, trust isn't, trust isn't a big player for HIV/AIDS. Trust isn't a big player in education. Trust isn't a big player in water. So in each causal slice, each characteristic scale, trust has only a tiny impact or effect. But on a broader scale, it could be the most important thing in all of the problems. We don't know that. We don't have a way of understanding the cascading effects of these things. And we certainly don't have a way of measuring the transactional value of what happens here. So trust, or the intrinsic, just dissolves into the woodwork, if you will, when you're looking at the tiny causal slices. Its power comes from the cascading effects up and down the scale. And that's what we don't have. We don't have a way of understanding these cascading effects, the transformational value, the planting of the seed that grows to have a greater effect. So that's the core issue here, is understanding the cascading effects that happen as a result of smaller individual activities. So that's my morning discussion on intrinsics. I will have Google Munnecke intrinsics. You'll be able to find it, I'm sure. And I'll be talking some more in the future about the intrinsics of time, and the time looping back and going around in this circle also, the nonlinear effects of time and the future affecting the present. I call that the good ancestor principle, and we'll be talking about that in another session. Thank you.